Several people have been arrested in Cuba after clashing with police at an unauthorized gay rights march. Cuban authorities had abruptly canceled Saturday's annual gay pride parade in Havana. In response, more than 100 LGBT activists took to the streets of the capital in protest. But marchers were arrested when they tried to push through the police officers. The gay community has long been repressed following the Cuban Revolution of 1959. Let's bring in Washington Blade International News editor Michael Lavers. He joins us now by phone from Colombia. So, Michael, what happened here?
Hi, David. Thanks for having me. So basically, this was an unauthorized march that happened in Havana yesterday. And as you said, there were about 100 LGBT rights activists who marched from a park near Cuba's capital to the ocean front. And from what I was seeing on social media, the march was allowed to happen, but it was under a lot of police. There were a lot of police officers in the area, and once it reached the ocean front, that's when the police decided to swoop in and put a stop to it. And then we saw a lot of videos on social media and a lot of reports that showed police roughing up some of the more prominent activists who were protesting and taking them into custody. So it turned ugly pretty quickly once the march reached the ocean front.
So here's what I'm confused by. Did they push through the police officers and the police officers took action because the people were trying to push through cops?
No, the police were, there was a heavy police presence in the area where the march was going to take place, and it was announced several days before it actually happened, and that was because there was a government-sponsored march that was supposed to happen on Saturday in Havana, but that was canceled earlier in the week, and so activists were quite upset over that. The independent activists who work outside of the government, and they decided to organize themselves and to hold this independent, unsanctioned march. And so people knew this was going to happen, and the police certainly knew that, and they were on the scene to make sure that it was didn't get out of hand, so to speak, but it certainly did with the arrest that we saw in Havana yesterday.
What is life like for people in Cuba who are gay and are open about it?
Certainly, after the revolution in 1959, gay men were sent to work camps, and certainly coming from where that took place in the 1960s to where we are today, things have improved, but there's still homophobia and transphobia, biphobia. There's still a lot of machismo attitudes towards LGBT people. So, yes, in some ways, things have improved somewhat. Maria Castro, the daughter of the former president of Cuba, Raúl Castro, is the one that, from within her position as part of the government, promotes LGBT issues internationally as well as in Cuba. But it's still very difficult for LGBT people in Cuba, like anyone in Cuba, with the current economic situation. There's still instances of discrimination. And then if you're organizing outside of the government, you face additional risks, such as what we saw yesterday in Havana when police cracked down. Independent activists are detained on a regular basis for challenging the government or for organizing. And so it's still, on one hand, things have moved forward, but on the other hand, things are still very difficult, especially if you start challenging the government and start challenging the organization from within it that promotes these LGBTI issues.
And Michael, what is this anti-gay discrimination? There's now a law against anti-gay discrimination. Tell me about that.
Yeah, there's in 2013, the Cuban parliament approved this law that bans anti-gay discrimination in the workplace. Maria Castro, again, she's a member of the Cuban parliament. She voted against it because it did not include transgender protection. So that's one legal advance in Cuba. Another thing that was quite controversial just a few months ago was the new constitution that Cubans approved back in February. At one point had an amendment that would have allowed same-sex marriage in Cuba. There was public opposition from evangelical groups, and the government in December decided to take that amendment out of the Constitution. So that sparked a lot of public protests from independent activists. And there's talk promoting advancing this issue again in a couple of years, but that remains to be seen. But there are certainly things on the books, on paper, that would make that would extend protections to LGBT Cubans, but having that in practice, depending on who you ask, is a very different reality.
All right, last question. I'm running out of time here. What happened last week? I know you tried to get into Cuba, but they stopped you. What was that about?
Right. The reason why I'm actually in Colombia is because I tried to enter Cuba on Wednesday to I go to Cuba every May. I have for several years. And when I approached customs in Havana at Jose Marti International Airport, I was told that I was on a list and that I was not going to be allowed into the country. And that
why were you on this list?
I have no idea, to be perfectly honest. I'm still trying to figure out why. They didn't tell me why, and I was put back on a plane to Miami 6.5 hours later.
You think it has anything to do with your coverage of LGBT rights in Cuba? I mean, is there something to that?
It may. I've been there. It would have been my 7th trip. I've reported on these issues for a long time,
right.
And I've never had an issue getting into Cuba, both on a journalist visa as well as on a tourist visa. And for whatever reason, the government on Wednesday decided they weren't going to allow me into the country. So I honestly have no idea.
Okay. And I saw in your reporting they didn't harm you, hurt you, mistreat you. They just didn't allow you in.
Right. I was treated very well, certainly. Okay. It wasn't a pleasant experience, but I was treated well.
Fair. Michael, we don't get to hear a ton of stuff about Cuba, especially on issues related to this. So thank you for the context behind the issue, and stay safe.
Thanks so much.